To find out more, just click on the video link in this post.
Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that he shall also reap. If we sow good, it's a golden harvest. If we sow evil, it's a dark harvest. Good evening. This is T. Allen Stringer, Pastor T. Allen Stringer, whichever you choose to use. Tonight, I decided to come out here and talk about the term the dark harvest. My theme tonight is the power of the indicted. The dark harvest, just for the sake of clarity, is a phrase that I was inspired to coin just a few days ago as I was considering all of the machinations that are going on in our world, both there in Ukraine and Russia and over here in America and all over the globe. And as I was thinking about the unwinding of events and what was happening with mankind, the thought dropped in my mind, the dark harvest. Of course, the opposite of that is the real good harvest we call the gold harvest, or I call the golden harvest, in which the crop is fertile, it yields correctly. The dark harvest is based on the culmination of men, their events and the things they are doing and the actions they have taken. As is indicated, God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. If you sow to the wind, you reap the whirlwind. All these things come to mind. So today I want to talk about, for maybe 15 minutes, the dark harvest and what I see happening in light of what's taking place in our nation's capital starting tomorrow. We'll be dealing in the January the 6th committee's open public report regarding the events that have taken place, I guess about 2 years ago now, maybe. Time flies. In which there was an insurrection in our nation's capital. And so this particularly prompts me to look at the dark harvest, at least as it relates to here in America. I want to talk on use three play of words, I should say. You've seen these phrases, but I want to use them to illustrate and to discuss what I see as it relates to the January the 6th Commission's report starting tomorrow and what I think it's going to yield. So I'm going to use these three phrases: birds of a feather, Smiths and Joneses, and children of Esau. So the birds of a feather, you know the phrase, the birds of a feather, flock together. So this refers to what I see happening in our political environment, is there certainly is a dividing into various camps. This began way back when President Obama came in, and of course it took on more steam as the last president was in. Of course, it is now culminating under this president. And what I mean by birds of a feather, starting back under Obama, when the last president ran, I noticed there were about 20 individuals running for the Republican position of president, to be nominated as president, to run for the office on their side. And I noticed there were governors, senators, pastors, congressmen, men with degrees, and then this one gentleman that seemingly edged them all out. Now, what I noticed happened was when he was running, they really did not attack him. And if you know anything about politics, they do what they call opposition research. They have all the goods on you, and they know how to pull it out to beat you. So usually they use it against each other, but for some strange reason, at least at the beginning it looked to be strange, they weren't really using it against him. They had all the goods, I'm sure. But it dawned on me that they weren't going to really single him out because he was doing something for them. He was invoking the birds of a feather principle. You see, there's a long-kept secret within the Republican Party that they use what is called dog whistles, and they have this little group and groups that are not really the kind you would put out in the public for fear of losing the independent vote, but you try to coach them along with small statements that aren't so overt, that aren't so obvious. So this guy comes out and he's blowing a bullhorn, and I noticed they didn't touch him. And the reason they didn't touch him, because they knew in order to win this cycle, it was going to be required that they can get everyone they could to vote. So all issues were on the table. And what was typically the small dog whistle needed to be louder, but they couldn't do it because they had standing. But like in A Few Good Men, like Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth. Well, they leaned towards this guy because he would, in fact, do what they couldn't do. And I think they thought that he was going to fizzle out. But as in the old cartoons where the mad scientist, he builds this monstrous robot. And he has this old-fashioned remote control, this clunky thing, and then it breaks, and then the monster gets out of hand. It's kind of what happened. But they got there because the foundation principle was birds of a feather. We're not as rude or as boisterous as this gentleman might be when we want to get that vote to come out. But we say little things and we promise little things and we suggest little things. We use certain issues that are going to get them to come out, like abortion and other things. But this guy, he drove them out. And of course, that's why they kept him along. But it ended up being a problem. So they were stuck now because now he's in power and he continues to use the bullhorn to mobilize the base and the things that really give them power. So hence birds of a feather. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then there's the Smiths and the Joneses. So to get along with him, they had to associate once he was in power. And that association was through wealth. Because Smith and Joneses, and I think I spelled that right. I was rushing when I did this. But Smiths and Joneses looks funny font-wise. But Smiths and Joneses refers to the idea that they copy each other. Wealthy, you want to be like them, you want to dress like them, you want to live like them, so you're keeping up with the Smiths and the Joneses, the old phrase we used to use back in the day. It refers to trying to keep up with the elite. And so when they got in office, they did have a common ground. It was the money. And if you paid attention, and I did very closely, once he got in office, the group that he brought in office was a part of that lower level. But there was a divide there because they didn't really like the upper level of their party. And there really was a plan that looked at first to try to overwhelm the old guard and then put all their people in, the undesirables, as I say, the people under the stairs is a reference I use for the lesser parts of any party. And you saw that at first with his, I believe it was Bannon was his chief of staff. Bannon was high up anyway. He was a senior guy, and he came in with the plan, and he was going to bring them in, but it didn't work. And what happened was when they passed this tax break, it was the Smith and Jones's tax break. It was for the wealthy. And I noticed they got rid of Bannon, and then him and McConnell kind of got along for a minute because it was pushing this big money thing, and they liked each other for a minute. So the Smith and Jones's concept is what kept them together. It kept them liking each other, at least, like the Bible says about Pilate and Herod. They got together over Jesus. Well, they got together over money, or the concept of the wealthy helping the wealthy. So that's the Smiths and the Joneses. Okay. Now, the children of Esau is the next concept. And so when I look at the children of Esau, that refers back to the religious aspect of all of this. And that's a very important part that we can't ignore when I come to my point about this black harvest or dark harvest. The children of Esau. So what does Esau have to do with this? So the children of Esau refers to the idea of Esau doing whatever he could to try to get the birthright back that he had sold. Because he had sold the birthright because he was hungry. There was a need. There was an idea. He had to, get some food, and he was famished, it seemed, coming in from the hunting it was. And his brother had the pot of beans, and he sold it in a desperate moment. I have always held that the religious Christian base in America has sold their birthright. I've always held that. There's this thing back in the early part of the American history when they said, "Go West, young man." It was a mantra, "Go West, young man." Now, if you know anything about the history of that, you should research that. That really was created by, I think there was a reporter who kind of used that as a theme, and it became an idea, and they turned it into a notion, and it led into a concept that is referred to as manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. You should look that up. Manifest destiny. Research that on the internet. And basically it holds, in principle, that there's this group that believes it's their God-given right to run the country, to run America, that God has selected them. They're the chosen. And this is really something that is believed within the Republican Party. They believe this. This is why you have the evangelicals and the individuals you see going off on YouTube in the pulpit in the name of God, because at their core, they believe God has chosen them. And this whole chosen idea, they also canvassed on top of this last leader. They believed that he was God's chosen. If you go through some of the tape of what they thought after he lost the election between November 3rd and January the 6th insurrection, it will blow your mind how they believed God was going to do something miraculous and how this was going to happen and God was going to turn it around. It was going to be a shift. It was just going to be miraculous. And the man that lost would indeed get in because it was the will of God, to the extent that I heard one pastor say on one of the videos after he had prophesied that God pretty much told him he was going to do this and that God indicated he was going to do this. This gentleman came back later and he said this, God is my witness. He pretty much intimated that even God gets it wrong. And I thought I would fall off my seat. Listen, the day that God gets it wrong, that's the day I quit. And you should quit with me. He said, even God gets it wrong. So that whole mindset, that desperation to get back something or to hold on to something is why I refer to it as the children of Esau. So what does that have to do with this whole January the 6th thing that's taking place right now? You know, the commission that's working on, trying to publicize the secrets of what went on behind the scenes. What does that have to do with this? This is what it has to do with. So the dark harvest, for this aspect of the dark harvest, because there's many aspects. The dark harvest aspect as it relates to this time is what I'm seeing when I'm not prophesying, but I am discerning the potential of an event or events that's going to take place. So I just gave you all of these things. Let me put it back up on the screen so you can see it again. I just gave you these concepts just crudely because I got on spontaneously. Birds of a feather, Smiths and Joneses, and children of Esau. I put those together as some of the foundational theories and philosophies that is binding these groups together to the extent where they, really don't seem to care about the rule of law. I said to Lady Stringer shortly after November the 3rd, after the election, I said to her these words. I said, I fear that the rule of law is dead in America because these gentlemen have reached such a fevered pitch of pursuing manifest destiny and being birds of a feather, and the Smiths and the Joneses, the wealth of the nation, that they are willing to sacrifice even the principles of the law. And have we not seen that play out these last few months? It's mind-boggling because these were the people of law and order, and I guess it's only relative to what they see as law and order, but it doesn't really pertain to them. Do as I say, not as I do. And so what we are seeing now, tomorrow night, and I was really hard-pressed to get on because I kept going over my mind, okay, I'll get on. I usually like to prepare, but I didn't this time, just speaking off the cuff here. But I have it in my head what I think is going to be a potential problem, or divining or discerning what's going to be a potential problem in America. And that is all of those things that I've mentioned earlier, birds of a feather, Smith and Joneses and the children of Esau, and have been pretty much capped off with this last round of events, and I'll explain to you what that is. You will note that the January 6th committee has been indicting or subpoenaing, and now they're starting to do some indictments, and they're starting to, bring the law against all of the inner circle of the former president. And the reason you should pay attention to that is because here's what happened. Here's the setup. The man was impeached twice and did not get put out of office. The man has evaded everything you could think of legally. He literally looks to be, at this point, above the law. There are some that saying, well, Letitia James in New York is going to get him. I'm not so sure about that. And the reason I'm not so sure about that, when I say get him, that's legally, is because out of all the goods you have, the goods mean nothing if the senators don't want to impeach you. If the same senators that stood on the floor and saw what you did and stood on the floor and said in clear speeches that this is it, this is a bridge too far, there's no way he has to go behind the scenes, and then vote to agree with the very thing that he was invoking to cause the insurrection, that is, the election is stolen. If those men are willing to look at videotape that you can see right now tonight and turn and say something the next day as if it doesn't exist, I hold there's probably not a jury in America that will be comprised of 12 people, I believe it is, who will all convict him. Now, it's possible, but I'm just discerning here. I'm not prophesying. But it's highly probable one holdout. Highly probable they won't get him that way. So why is that important? Because he has demonstrated he's a Houdini, it appears to be, as we say, Teflon Don, when it comes to rising above the law. And now all of his inner circle basically have been indicted, imprisoned, jailed, and they have been subpoenaed, and they're resisting. Now the question is, what are they resisting for? Well, see, here's how it goes. All of this that's going on is held together by one single thread, and that is the election that's coming up in November, and of course the one to follow in 2024. It's highly probable that Republicans will take the Congress and potentially the Senate, but the Congress is enough, because I believe that's where the purse strings are for all of these investigations and subpoenas and things, and they're going to shut all that down. So the thing is, the birds of a feather, the Smith and the Joneses, are holding together, banding together, saying, well, just ride the storm out, because if we win the election, then we're just going to shut all this down. And we're going to do some other things too. We're going to do tit for tat in a major way. So that's a problem too, but that's another series. But let's just stick with this point. We are going to hold all of them accountable. We're going to burn the bridges. I put a video out the other day about Adolf Hitler. When he came into office, they ran a campaign called the Night of the Long Knives. And I'm not saying they're going to do this. They may well, but I'm not saying they're going to do this. But in Hitler's case, when he got in power after being opposed, during the Night of the Long Knives, they assassinated all of their opposition. They killed, they stabbed, they shot. And it's in history known as the Night of the Long Knives. And then he consolidated power. So these men are holding out in hopes and they're really believing they're going to win the Congress and are edging towards the Senate. So therefore, they don't have to kowtow or give into subpoenas or worry about indictments, because they're going to get power back. And if you fast forward to 2024 and they get the White House, then pardons galore. Pardons here, pardons there. So, you don't have to worry about a lot of time in jail, a year, maybe 2 years. We get it, we're going to take it. So everything is being bet on the farm right there. So the thing to watch is the election. Not all that's going on. The indictments are one thing, subpoenas are another thing. What we're going to see starting tomorrow night is another thing. But the thing to watch is November. Now we have two potential dark harvests. One has to do with what we saw today. I think there was a guy outside of the house of Judge Kavanaugh's house. Now, that's about the abortion and other things potentially, I'm guessing. But there are the fringes now. They are loose. As I say, the inmates have taken over the asylum all over on both sides. You're going to see it on both sides. See, I'm in the middle. I'm not really dealing with a party. I'm in the middle because I'm dealing with God. But both sides have the fringes, and these people are desperate to win the day. And right now, time is running out. The world is shrinking. Times are hard. We're on the verge of a major inflation breakdown crisis on Wall Street, the energy crisis. They say that electricity is going to go up 200% potentially. It's going to make oil look cheap. Gas is high, but it's going to make oil look cheap. And so people see the handwriting on the wall and they're desperate. So this November and next November, which is the 2024 key, from this point going forward, America is going to undergo a dark harvest. All of the seeds that have been sown over the centuries, particularly these last 10 years, 10 to 20 years in politics, all of these seeds that have been sown are now going to bring a crop. As is said, if you put a bad seed in the ground, you get a bad harvest. You put a good seed in the ground, you get a good harvest. And for the past at least 15 to 20 years, as I can recall, bad seed after bad seed, and it has reached a fevered pitch. The last farmer, before the one we have now, fertilized the soil real good, and it may bring forth a harvest. Now, I say may because I don't know what God intends. Prophecy is very evasive right here. We know in part, we prophesy in part. And it looks like there's some potentials. Here are some of the outside potentials, and I'm going to go. The outside potential is that the Republicans will win the Congress, and then they're going to create havoc. And I think many people underestimate the radical side of the liberal left. But I remember the Weather Underground and all of those things, Patty Hearst back in the day. They know how to bomb and do stuff too. And right now you're talking about taking homosexual rights off the table. You're talking about taking abortion off the table, and they are desperate. And many people joke, but I often say to them, don't forget, Alexander the Great was a homosexual. He conquered the world. Don't underplay them. They can be fierce. They can bring a dark harvest too. All that love stuff, all the color stuff, don't be fooled by that. There's a fierceness there when they feel they're threatened, and that can be. So don't underplay that. And of course, if the Republicans lose this next election cycle, it's definitely going to be a problem. They're going to be very desperate because they're already on the edge now, having been beaten by a Negro. And of course, now you have Biden, and it looks like Kamala Harris might be the next. People say no, but hey, I'm telling you, pay attention to this. It's possible. I believe women are going to rise and take over the country and the world, as a matter of fact. So I don't know what her turn is in. It's going to happen. Eve is on the rise. That's a whole nother series. But the idea is it's a dark harvest. Doesn't matter who's going to be where. We are in for a ride. So to the church of God, you really need to mind your business and just start doing God the way it's supposed to be, because the reality is this stuff is in the script, and we need to pay attention to that. We need to recognize, yes, we have social associations and issues and civil rights, but the reality is this is on prophecy's clock. And as Gamaliel understood, they were the chosen. I want to underscore this before I close. They were the chosen of God, the Bible says. Clearly, we all believe that. But when those ignorant fishermen came talking about Jesus this and Jesus that, Gamaliel didn't stand on Jehovah Elohim and Yahweh and God. He said these words: if this work be of God, you can't stop it. If it ain't, it's going to come to nothing. This is the high priest. This is the Supreme Court justice equivalent, the chief. He says, if it's of God, you can't stop it, and you might be fighting against God. This was the chosen man, the highest learned man in Israel, had power, second to none. He said, leave it alone. Let's see what happens. Even though it was a threat to them, he said, leave it alone. Such wisdom is lost in the church today because we think we need to fight. The Esau spirit is what's taking the evangelicals, and they've gotten off on a wrong path because they think they're doing something for God. God said, if I was hungry, would I ask you? He can handle this. We need to read the prophetic tea leaves and be like the sons of Issachar. Know when it's time to war and when it's not time to war, to discern the seasons of the time. So there's a dark harvest coming. This public hearing starting tomorrow night is going to unleash some major issues in our world. It's a dark harvest that's been brewing. It's going to come to pass. But, you know, I said this in a sermon I preached just the other day. Let's do it again at Pastor Gail Hill's church in Springfield, the family church, and I intimated to them that it's time for us to get ready to minister. And I suggested to them, and to you I suggest the same thing, that no major move of God happens without trouble first. So trouble is God's divine usher. Trouble ushers in the move of God, and we are to follow suit. We don't fear, because God has not given us the spirit of fear. Love, power, and a sound mind. So trouble shouldn't drive us to political resolve. It should drive us to get dressed in our spiritual clothes, in our armor, in war, as I share with Temple Nation, and during this season, learn how to fish in dirty waters, because this is a different ministry post-COVID, and the time is set. The dark harvest is here, but remember this one point. Might be a dark harvest, but the Bible says, let your light so shine that men may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. This is T. Allen Stringer saying, in all thy getting, get a good understanding. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that he shall also reap. If we sow good, it's a golden harvest. If we sow evil, it's a dark harvest.